Ferdinand Schörner was one of the most controversial senior commanders in the German military during the Second World War, remembered for his intense loyalty to Nazi ideology, his demanding style of leadership, and his role in the final collapse of Hitler's regime. His career began long before the rise of National Socialism, rooted in the traditions of the old Imperial German Army. Born on June 12, 1892, in Munich, he grew up in Bavaria at a time when military service was closely tied to regional pride and social prestige. He entered the Bavarian army as a young officer candidate in 1911 and found himself, like many of his generation, thrust almost immediately into the First World War. In the trenches of that conflict, Schorner earned a reputation for bravery, discipline, and personal toughness. He fought on the Western Front and later in the mountainous regions of the Italian Front, where warfare demanded physical resilience and initiative. His actions earned him Germany's highest award for bravery, the Pour le Mérite, which significantly boosted his standing within the officer corps. By the time the war ended, Germany had been defeated and the monarchy dissolved, but Schorner remained committed to the military profession. He joined the newly formed Reichswehr, the small army permitted to Germany under the Treaty of Versailles. In this force of limited size, advancement was slow and competition fierce, but Schorner managed to secure positions that allowed him to develop his leadership skills and deepen his knowledge of infantry tactics. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933 and began expanding the German military, Schorner's career gained momentum. He was known for his strict discipline and his uncompromising approach to duties, qualities that matched the new regime's emphasis on obedience, ideological unity, and aggressive expansion. Although not one of the early political supporters of National Socialism, he adapted quickly to the expectations of the Nazi state. As the army grew and preparations for war intensified, his competence and reliability brought him steady promotions. By the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, he had risen to the rank of general and was entrusted with significant responsibilities. During the early campaigns of the war, Schorner continued to build a reputation as a capable leader. He served in Poland and later in France, where Germany achieved rapid victories. His most defining service, however, came on the Eastern Front after the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. This front, the largest and bloodiest battlefield of the war, demanded enormous endurance from commanders and soldiers alike. Schorner thrived in the harsh conditions, demonstrating a high degree of personal energy and an ability to inspire relentless effort from his troops. Yet this same drive also contributed to his darker reputation. He became known for extremely severe discipline, including summary executions for desertion, retreat without orders, or perceived lack of will. For many soldiers, particularly those suffering under impossible conditions, Schorner embodied the unforgiving nature of German military leadership during the later years of the war. One of his early notable commands in the Soviet Union was the leadership of the Mountain Corps in the Caucasus, where German forces attempted to seize vital oil fields. The campaign ultimately failed to achieve its strategic objectives, yet Schorner's performance solidified his reputation for toughness and loyalty. As the war turned against Germany, these qualities became increasingly important to Hitler, who sought commanders he believed would stand firm and maintain discipline even as the situation deteriorated. Schorner's willingness to enforce strict measures and his readiness to echo Hitler's ideological expectations helped him rise further. He became one of the few officers trusted completely by the German leader during the chaotic final phase of the war. In 1944, after the collapse of German positions in the Balkans and the rapid advance of Soviet forces, Schorner was given command of Army Group North, which was trapped in the Baltic region of Latvia. Here he attempted to hold his increasingly isolated forces together while executing defensive operations under constant Soviet pressure. Although he managed to delay Soviet advances in some sectors, the overall strategic situation made long-term success impossible. Nonetheless, Hitler praised his determination and used it as an example of the steadfastness he demanded from all his commanders. This loyalty led to Schorner's promotion to Field Marshal in April 1945, a time when Germany was already on the verge of defeat. As the war neared its end, Schorner assumed command of Army Group Center, which was positioned in Czechoslovakia. This force represented one of the last organized German military formations still capable of resistance. Hitler appointed Schorner as commander-in-chief of the entire German army in the final days of April 1945. Although this title held little practical significance by that point, Germany's infrastructure had collapsed, communication lines were disrupted, and individual units often acted independently. Still, the appointment reflected Hitler's belief that Schorner's harsh discipline could somehow restore order. Schorner, however, was unable to change the outcome. His forces were exhausted, cut off, and overwhelmed by Soviet and Allied offensives. As the situation deteriorated further, he ordered his troops to continue resisting while attempting to preserve some semblance of cohesion. Despite his demands, the front lines disintegrated rapidly. Soldiers deserted, surrendered, or attempted to flee westward to avoid Soviet captivity. Schorner himself eventually abandoned his headquarters and fled to Austria, where he surrendered to American forces on May 7, 1945, one day before Germany's official capitulation. His conduct during these final days became a source of significant controversy. Many accused him of hypocrisy for enforcing extreme discipline on his troops while ultimately saving himself. Others pointed to his treatment of ordinary soldiers throughout the war and criticized him for prioritizing ideology and punishment over practical leadership and the welfare of his men. As post-war assessments of the war unfolded, Schorner became a symbol of the most rigid and uncompromising aspects of the Nazi military structure. After surrendering to the Americans, Schorner was handed over to Soviet authorities due to his actions on the Eastern Front. The Soviets tried him for war crimes, and in 1952 he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Reports from Soviet prisons suggest that he spent his years in captivity under harsh conditions, though details vary. In 1955, following improved diplomatic relations between West Germany and the Soviet Union, he was released and allowed to return to Germany. His return did not lead to public rehabilitation. Instead, he faced legal proceedings in West Germany connected to the executions of deserters during the final months of the war. He was convicted and sentenced to a term in prison, though he ultimately served only a portion of it. Schorner lived a relatively quiet life after his release. Unlike some former military leaders who wrote memoirs or participated in public debates about the war, he remained withdrawn. He settled in Munich and worked briefly as a civilian, reportedly as a sales representative, before retiring fully. He received little public sympathy, and his name continued to evoke strong reactions from historians, veterans, and ordinary citizens. Many viewed him as a commander who embodied the extremes of Nazi militarism, valuing discipline above human cost. Others acknowledged his tactical abilities, but saw them overshadowed by his ideological loyalty and rigidity. He died on July 2, 1973, at the age of 81. His passing prompted some discussion in the German press, much of it critical. For many decades after the war, Schorner remained a divisive figure, often cited as a cautionary example of what happens when military authority is fused with totalitarian ideology. His career illustrates the trajectory of many officers who rose to power in the Nazi era, shaped by the hardships of the First World War, hardened by interwar military culture, and ultimately drawn into a system that rewarded loyalty to political leadership over independent judgment. In the broader context of German military history, Schorner occupies a unique place. He was neither one of the early architects of Hitler's strategy, nor a purely professional strategist seeking to keep distance from political authority. Instead, he represented a type of commander whose personal ambition and belief in strict discipline aligned strongly with the demands of the regime. His willingness to enforce the harshest measures, and his consistent support for Hitler's directives, even when the war was clearly lost, marked him as an outlier among senior leaders who, by 1944 and 1945, increasingly questioned the direction of the conflict. For soldiers under his command, experiences were mixed. Some admired his energy, personal bravery, and tactical focus. Others feared him, describing him as a commander who drove units beyond their limits and punished failure with severe consequences. Stories of him visiting front lines, berating officers, and ordering immediate executions contributed to his reputation. While some later accounts exaggerated these actions, there is no doubt he adopted an uncompromising approach that few other senior commanders matched. In historical analysis, Schorner is often contrasted with officers who resisted Hitler or attempted to mitigate his most destructive orders. He represents the opposite end of that spectrum, someone who embraced the regime's ideology and enforced its expectations even as defeat became inevitable. This distinction has influenced how he is remembered. particularly in post-war Germany, where examinations of responsibility and complicity have shaped discussions about the military's role in the Nazi period. Despite his negative legacy, understanding Schorner's career provides insight into how authoritarian systems cultivate, promote, and rely on certain types of individuals. His rise, authority, and eventual fall demonstrate how personal ambition and rigid loyalty can be rewarded in the short term, only to result in long-term condemnation. His story also highlights the complexities faced by the German army during the final months of the war, when discipline broke down, leadership faltered, and decisions were often driven by ideology rather than realistic assessments. Ferdinand Schörner remains a difficult figure to evaluate purely as a military leader, because his actions were inseparable from the political environment in which he operated. His career reflects both the strengths and the destructive consequences of a system that valued unwavering obedience above critical thought. Today he is remembered not for great victories or strategic brilliance, but for his unyielding enforcement of a doomed regime's will, his harsh treatment of his own soldiers, and his place among the final loyalists who tried to uphold the Nazi military structure even as it collapsed around them. If you have a thought regarding Ferdinand Schörner, drop it in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe.